Today I'm going to explain how to keep and breed what is arguably the world's smallest cichlid, Neolamprologus multifasciatus, or the multie for short. Multies are shell dwellers from Lake Tanganyika in Africa. As far as setup goes, a tank size of 10 gallons or more is recommended. I think more is better. I ended up moving from a 20-gallon high to a 29 because more floor space means more space for territories and happier multies. Lighting isn't particularly critical as long as you can see the fish well. Filtration, well, I think that heavy filtration is good, and especially if it can increase the water circulation. The fish seem to do well with a fairly high degree of circulation. I use a pre-filter in my tank, which is a good idea, especially if you're using sand as a substrate. Otherwise, you can end up with sand destroying your filter impeller. Temperature should be around 78 or 80 degrees. This tank is kept at 80.5 degrees. As far as other water parameters go, Lake Tanganyika is hard and alkaline, so it's best to try to replicate that to some degree, although captive bred multies are a little bit more forgiving than their wild-caught relatives. My tap water is fairly hard and alkaline. It comes out of the tap at a pH of about 8.0, so it's not surprising that they do fine in that with no changes to the water, but I do buffer with the substrate as well. And as far as substrate goes, they tend to do well with sand. I've noticed that they can do well with moderately coarse sand, such as pool filter sand, or with really fine sand, and anything in between. The substrate that I offer them is about 80% pool filter sand, which is pH neutral, and about 20% aragonite sand, which is usually used for marine tanks and does buffer the water. Shell dwellers is obviously a very appropriate name for these fish, so shells are a crucial part of the decor in the tank. They not only serve as decor, but as shelters, breeding sites, and so on. The shells of choice for many hobbyists, including myself, are escargot shells. I purchased these on Amazon, and I give them good rinsing before using them. The fish, of course, took to them immediately. As far as feeding goes, multies aren't too picky. As long as they can fit it into their mouths, they're likely to eat it. Flake food is an excellent food, as all the fish from fry to adulthood can take it easily, as long as it's appropriately ground. Small pellets can work as long as they are small enough, and they do have to be quite small. I've noticed that 1 millimeter pellets are really too big for most of the multies, especially the younger ones, but 0.5 millimeter pellets are accepted very well. I also offer them microworms just about daily, and I also give them a lot of Daphnia and amphipods. A lot of hobbyists have noted that the more live and frozen foods you tend to give them, the more they tend to produce fry. And that leads us into breeding. I could sum up breeding multies in 5 words. Just try and stop them. But one of the attractions of keeping multies is that the fry come in small, manageable clutches. I've seen clutches of fry numbering anywhere from 1 to 10 fry, so you don't have to worry about being overwhelmed by multi fry. Not immediately, at any rate. Multies are prolific breeders over time. Sexing multies is pretty easy. In many ways, they're not visually very different, but the males are much larger, probably maxing out at about 2 inches long, and the females are about half that length and much less massive. Behaviorally, there are some differences too that help distinguish the sexes. The larger males tend to stake out a territory, which consists of a pit in the sand with a bed of shells in the center. In this tank, there are 3 very well-defined territories. Females come into the territory, and the males seem to recognize females even when they're quite tiny. For example, this female paired with a male a few months ago. Right now, she isn't even an inch long, and she was much smaller when they paired up, and has now produced 2 clutches of fry in the past month. 1 clutch of 1 fry, and then another clutch of about 3. So the males seem to recognize the females, even when there's no way that I could. The eggs are laid in shells, and eventually the fry come out and spend a lot of time between and around the bases of the shells. They hide a lot at first, but they'll come out when they sense food. Once the fry emerge from the shells, they're already large enough to eat microworms, brine shrimp naupli, and finely ground flake food. And as they get larger, they tend to explore the tank more and more, and finally they go off to live on their own. Parents don't seem to interact with the fry to the extent that many cichlids do. For example, I've never seen them pick up fry in their mouths to retrieve them, nor did a fry appear to swarm around the parents, but the parents do vigorously defend their shell bed which ends up providing pretty effective protection for the fry. I've seen a multie ward off a much larger Gelitochromis cichlid repeatedly. Some other things I've learned about multies is that they will use vertical space. You'll hear people say that they won't use a vertical space in the tank, but when it's available to them, they will. And often I've noticed this is lower ranking individuals that don't seem to be able to hold down a territory or have lost a territory. And I was wondering whether this was natural or not, but if you see the video, there's a link to the video in the card above. You can see a video by Light Search who took some footage of multies in the wild, and that's how it works. There are a lot of multies down on the bottom who have shell beds, and then there are a lot of multies up higher in the water column that don't have territories yet. As far as tank mates go, my particular multies are fine with gold barbs, and they've done well with Gelitochromis cichlids as well, Gelitochromis marlieri. But I've also had them with olive nerites and with trumpet snails. Now, trumpet snails are really fun to keep with multies because the multies object to the trumpet snails being in their territories, and they will pick them up and drop them. So I've seen it happen several times. I haven't caught it on film yet, but anytime you look around the territory of the multies, you're likely to find trumpet snails that have recently been evicted. Though multies are not the most colorful fish, they are attractively patterned, and in the right light their eyes have a nice blue glint to them. The real draw, though, to keeping multies is their interesting behavior. There are always minor territorial disputes, shell excavations, snail removals. There's always something going on, and it's fun to find new fry. If you want a lot of personality in a small package, start with half a dozen multies, a few dozen escargot shells, and watch the shell-dwelling fun begin. Thanks for watching. I post videos every Friday, all related to keeping aquarium and vivarium pets. You're most welcome to leave a comment and a like, and for those of you who are waiting for an animal voiceover at the end,
subscribe.